So it is a really ill-defined term, actually. And in some sense, it's a bit old-fashioned. So it was introduced a few decades ago already. But I think it refers to that set of processes, mental processes, that allow us to obtain our goals by, among other things, resisting distractions and impulses and temptations. So it's kind of an umbrella term to refer to things that happen between knowledge and action. It bridges. It's the thing that allows us to bridge knowledge and action. And it's the funny thing is that having worked on this for so long doesn't really help to define it better. But then a friend of mine and colleague just wrote this fantastic book, really, on cognitive control, and it's for a lay audience, or I should say an academic lay audience. So basically for students from any background, but with an interest, I suppose, in science. And he does such a fantastic job in 400 pages to really also basically reactivate in me why it is so cool to study cognitive control. And you're also asking about motivation, how it links to motivation.
Yeah, right. But first, what is that book? Because the listeners most likely would
yeah.
to know.
So I read it just before it's about to come out, and it's called On Task. Basically, how we can stay on task and how we get things done. Yeah, that's the title. But it's a really sort of accessible book that's going to come out, I think, in a few months. Okay. So it's not quite out yet. And the author is David Badder. Badder is Badre. And he's a professor at Brown University in Princeton. But I was really so impressed by that book and sort of contextualizing, sort of putting it in the context of various other constructs of interest, like motivation, like learning, and episodic memory and future thinking, and all those kind of things that we might end up talking about today too. But
right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. This would have been one of my last questions, actually, but it's great that you bring that up. I'm sure there are some other books as well, but sorry for interrupting you. You wanted to also say how motivation links into cognitive control.
So given that when we talk about cognitive control, we talk about the processes that allow us to obtain our goals, that already implies how important motivation is, right? How we what's the drive? What motivates us to obtain our goals? And so those two are really closely related and intertwined. And whereas, let's say, a few decades ago, most researchers of cognitive control would focus on the question, how do we implement it? How do we implement control? So how do we resist distraction? How do we maintain our goals and our capacity to exert control? I would say in the last maybe 5 to 7 years, or 5 to 8 years, people have started to shift their attention not just to how do we exert control, but how do we motivate ourselves to exert control? How do we decide whether it's worth our effort to exert control? So it's really sort of shifted attention to the question of our willingness to exert control, or decision making about whether or not to exert control. Because I think many failures of control arise, for example, in ADHD or in addiction, or they arise not just because we can't exert control, we cannot, but because we do not assign value to exerting control. That's a slightly sort of different thing.
Yeah.
And it's not laziness, but it's about this ability to make it the decision to focus and resist distraction. I guess that's a mouthful.
Right. Is it possible to frame it as in, so cognitive control is more as in how to stay on task, how to allocate those resources, and the motivation more like why do it in the first place.
Yeah, so that's how I think about it.
Yeah.
And the motivational aspect in that sense is really related to what we sometimes refer as meta control. It's like the sort of
the layer above.
The layer above, exactly. It's like, how do we control whether to exert control in a sense?